Hey everyone, and welcome. So for today, I want you to think of yourself as a digital architect. Yeah, that's it. We're not just going to learn about the cloud, we're actually going to build a mental model of how Azure works right from the ground up. We'll start with the blueprints and go all the way to the finished building. So first up, let's check out the master plan. All right, so here's our roadmap for this project. We're going to kick things off with the three main blueprints for the cloud. Then we'll get into organizing your digital real estate. After that, it's all about the core tools, your compute and data services. Then we'll touch on the super important stuff, networking and security, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with the key things you absolutely need to remember. Okay, so any good architect knows the very first question you have to ask is, what are we actually building? A skyscraper, a house, a workshop? In the cloud, that translates to choosing one of three fundamental service models. And this table, this right here, is probably one of the most important concepts to get your head around. It's called the shared responsibility model. Basically, it's all about a trade-off. As you look from left to right, from IaaS over to SaaS, you'll see that Azure starts to manage more and more of the work for you. So you're essentially trading some of your hands-on control for a whole lot more convenience. Let's break that down. First up, we've got Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS. Now this is the do-it-yourself option. It gives you the absolute maximum control. Think of it like this. You're renting a plot of land and all the heavy machinery, the cranes, the bulldozers, everything. You get all that raw power, but you're responsible for building everything on top. That means you manage the operating system, you install the software, the whole shebang. The classic example? Azure Virtual Machines, for sure. Okay, let's move one step up the convenience ladder to Platform as a Service, or PaaS. Now, if IaaS was renting the land, PaaS is like renting a fully equipped workshop. You walk in, and the power is on, the tools are on the wall, the workbench is ready to go, it's all set up and maintained for you. All you have to do is bring your brilliant idea, that's your code, and just start creating. Azure handles the platform, you just focus on your app. And finally, at the very top, we have Software as a Service, or SaaS. This is the ultimate move-in ready option. You're not building a thing. You're just using a finished, fully furnished product that someone else built and maintains for you. The perfect example is something we all know, Office 365. You just log in and start working. You don't worry about servers or updates. Microsoft and Azure are handling all of that stuff behind the curtain. All right, so we've picked our blueprint, IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS. Now, what's next? Well, before you start building a dozen projects, you've got to organize your land, right? You need a system. In Azure, this is all about creating a clear structure for things like billing, who gets access to what, and setting company-wide rules. And Azure gives you this really logical top-down hierarchy. Think of it like a set of nesting dolls. At the very top, the biggest doll, you have management groups. These let you set rules for your entire organization. Inside of those, you have subscriptions. This is a super important level. It's how you handle your billing and your main management boundary. Then inside each subscription, you create these things called resource groups, which are basically just folders to keep related things together. And finally, inside those folders, you have your actual resources, the individual building blocks, like your VMs and databases. Yeah, so the key thing to get about resource groups is that they're just logical containers. They're like folders on your computer. And this is a perfect example of why they're so useful. You could have one resource group for your test environment and a totally separate one for your production environment. This is brilliant because it lets you manage everything for that environment, all the VMs, storage, everything, as a single unit. You can deploy them all at once or, and this is handy, delete the entire test environment in one click when you're done. Okay, our land is zoned, our folders are organized. Now it's time to bring in the heavy machinery. Let's talk about compute services. These are the absolute engines of your application. This is what actually does the work and runs your code. And the most fundamental tool in the box is the virtual machine, or VM. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a whole computer, CPU, memory, storage, the works. But instead of sitting on your desk, it lives in a giant, secure Azure data center. And you guessed it, this is our classic IaaS service, giving you that deep, foundational level of control we talked about. So why use a VM? The number one reason is flexibility. You have total control. You can install pretty much anything you want on it. But, and this is a big but, with great power comes great responsibility, right? You're the one in charge of managing the operating system, keeping it patched, installing the software, all of it. This makes it perfect for things like moving an older application into the cloud, what we call lift and shift, or anytime you just need that fine-grained control over every little setting. But what if you don't want all that responsibility? Well, let's climb back up that convenience ladder and talk about app services. This is a fantastic example of PaaS in action. It's a platform built specifically for one job, hosting web apps and APIs. The best part? You don't even see the virtual machine underneath. You don't have to manage it. You just deploy your code. And really, that's the magic of it. With app services, Azure is handling all the boring, tedious stuff for you. The patching, making sure it can handle traffic, the underlying security, it's all managed. That frees you up to just focus on what you do best, writing amazing code. It's perfect for modern web development. You could spin up a WordPress site in literally minutes and never once have to worry about the server it's running on. All right, so we've got our compute engines running, but every great project needs materials, right? You need a place to store your raw supplies, your tools, your finished products. In the digital world, that's data. So let's look at how Azure helps you handle all your data storage needs. The absolute cornerstone of storage in Azure is something called a storage account. The best way to think about this is like your own massive, super versatile digital warehouse. And it's not a specialized warehouse for just one thing. It's a single place where you can store all kinds of different data. So inside this big warehouse, you've got different sections or aisles for different kinds of stuff. You've got blob storage. That's for all your unstructured, bulky things like images, videos, and log files. Then there's file storage, which works just like a good old-fashioned shared network drive. You've got table storage, which is a simple kind of NoSQL database. And finally, queue storage, which is a clever way for different parts of your application to pass messages back and forth. Okay, that's great for files and messages, but what about when you need a really structured, traditional database, with rows and columns? Well, that's where Azure SQL Database shines. This is an incredibly powerful, fully managed database service. And notice the magic words there, fully managed. It's another PaaS offering. You get all the power of Microsoft SQL Server, but you never have to manage the actual server it runs on. So what does that mean for you? It means you get a super high-performance database that is always patched and always up to date. Azure takes care of all that back-end maintenance headache. This makes it an absolutely perfect choice for the database that powers a critical business application, where you just can't afford downtime, and reliability is everything. Okay, we're making great progress. We've got our compute services running, our data is stored, but right now, everything is kind of sitting in its own isolated building. The next job for any good architect is to build the roads to connect everything, and just as important, to build the fences and walls to protect it all. And that brings us to networking and security. The fundamental building block for all of this is the virtual network, or VNet for short. You can think of this as your own private, fenced-off piece of land within the massive Azure cloud. It creates a secure bubble where your resources, like your VMs and your databases, can all talk to each other safely without ever being exposed to the wild west of the public internet. It is literally your own private road system. So once you have your private roads, how do you control the traffic? Well, you've got two main security guards. First, there's the Network Security Group, or NSG. This is your basic firewall. It's like a guard standing at the door of each of your buildings. They check the basic credentials, the IP address, the port, to decide if someone is allowed in or not. Pretty simple. But then you have the Web Application Firewall, the WAF. This is a much more specialized guard. This one is like a mail screener in the lobby. It doesn't just check who the package is from. It actually opens it up and inspects the contents to look for dangerous things like common web attacks. All right, let's bring it all home. What are the architect's final takeaways? Especially if you're maybe studying for something like the AZ 900 exam. Listen up. First, you have got to know those cloud models inside and out. IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. Understand that trade-off between control and convenience. Second, get that architectural hierarchy straight in your head. Management groups contain subscriptions, which contain resource groups, which contain your resources. And third, make sure you know the purpose of the core services we talked about today. What's a VM for? When would you use an app service? So there you have it. We've gone through the whole process, from picking the blueprints to laying the foundation to putting up the walls and securing the doors. You now have the fundamental knowledge of a digital architect in Azure. The only question left is, now that you know the building blocks, what are you going to build? Thanks so much for joining me.